Okay, now moving into Southeast Asia. So multiple regions within this large region, it gets kind of divided up. So looking at those geographic features, economic development, we'll talk a good bit about the economic system here, some of its history, and then their political system, Asian. So this region here, Southeast Asia, we're talking about some of the various islands, but moving over from India, of course, to the east. So not a lot of large countries in this, but lots of smaller ones, and again, some of our island nations as well. So if we look at these, again, we won't mention all of them, but Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, of course, we think about the Vietnam War, Cambodia, we hear a good bit about, unfortunately, more about conflict, so we'll mention that later. The Philippine Islands, though, Indonesia, kind of one of the larger, it's not a land, but they have a lot of different islands make up this country of Indonesia. We talk about a lot with trade, thinking about, of course, lower labor laws or absence of labor laws allow resources to be made much cheaper in these areas and then exported. So we look at the geographic features. So the Arakan Mountains, Naga Hills, and the Irrawaddy River. So these are in western Myanmar. So this mountain range separates India and Myanmar, so kind of a natural border. It has lots of different mountains that come together to make up this mountain range, and that includes the Naga Hills as part of this mountain region. And then the Irrawaddy River, you can see here, actually flows all the way through the Arakan Mountains, originates though up in China, and then comes down into the Bay of Bengal. So it runs continuously all the way through India, or through Myanmar. All right, another river here, the Mekong. It's actually one of the most biodiverse rivers in all of the world. It has definitely been impacted by damming to this, but as you can see, it actually starts in China, but it goes all the way down through this region, so through Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and a little bit into Vietnam before getting to that South China Sea. But again, the damming that occurs in China, but that as well as the Irrawaddy that start in China. And so just think here for a second about some of the potential problems with that. Well, some of those problems, again, are the damming. So if China decides to dam the river, well, that impacts the amount of water going to everything else below it. Also thinking about pollution. So each country can control its own and have its own rules about pollution, but if China doesn't have the same, or they don't have any, then that pollution flows downstream and it highly impacts all of these other countries. Carstenses, this is actually the highest mountain range in Indonesia. So of course, Indonesia is one of kind of the island nations, and we think about islands as being tropical islands, but a lot of them have very high elevations, and this is an example of one of those. Plate boundaries have a huge impact in this region. So you can see in all of this region, all of these plate boundaries that come together. And again, this is where those geological activities occur. So lots of activity is occurring in this region. So lots of tsunamis, lots of earthquakes, volcanoes, and all of that due to all of these different plates coming together and overlapping with these boundaries. Now the climates and hazards, kind of coming back to that, back to those plate boundaries. The climate, though, it is mainly tropical, so lots of rainfall. Again, the equator is right here, so we think about those high and low pressure systems bringing lots of rainfall to these areas north and south of the equator. So lots of rainfall. However, this region is part of the Ring of Fire that makes up this volcanic activity due to those tectonic plate boundaries coming together. So in that Ring of Fire, of course, you have lots of volcanoes, which is where the fire comes from, but also a lot of earthquakes, That leads to a lot of tsunamis. We think about Indonesia especially being hit by a lot of those we'll talk more about. Um, but this volcanic activity, so just a couple examples, definitely not all inclusive, but in 1815, Mount Tambora the eruption was so powerful that it actually cooled the global temperature and caused crop failure as far away from this region as Egypt and France. So not just locally, but it impacted the global temperature so much so that it impacted crop production hundreds of miles away. Another example in the 1800s, so in 1883, the Krakatoa, which is one of the volcanic islands, erupted. It was so violent that it actually collapsed the volcano. So the mountain range of the volcano actually collapsed. Tens of thousands of individuals died during that, and it took several years for the global weather pattern to normalize due to that eruption. It was actually considered the loudest sound in modern history, and it was heard from over 3,000 miles away. So that was just how severe this eruption was. Now, kind of switching over to our economy here of this region. So economic geography just is looking at the spatial aspects of economic development. So more industrialized versus less developed nations, and kind of why that is based on its geography. So a term here that we'll use is a value added good, which is an example where raw material has been changed in a way that enhances its value. So for example, a value added good would be a table. So you can't go out and just find a table. You have to get the wood, which is the raw material, change the wood in a way that makes it more profitable. So a tree, if you were just selling a log, would be less than if you were selling a table, because you had to put time into it. You had to put work into it, so it increased its value. So it's called a value added good. So again, exporting lumber to make that dining room table. So the lumber is the raw material, the table is the value added good. Now in this region is where we have the 4 Asian tigers that you may have heard of before. So South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore make up these 4 Asian tigers. And they're called this because they have a huge impact on our global economy. So if we just kind of look at what these resources are, so you can look all of these up in these cool little diagrams online at the OEA website. But anyways, they kind of look at this. So if we look at Hong Kong, you can see a lot of minerals, so gold and silver, and then jewelry. So gold and silver are the raw materials. Jewelry would be the value added good. So it's been changed in a way that enhances its value. But again, if we look at the economy of Hong Kong, again, a lot of diamonds and a lot of gold and silver. We also see, though, some integrated circuits. This will be a common theme that we'll see. So we're thinking about like computer and technology. Singapore, the integrated circuits is actually its largest export. It does have a good bit of refined petroleum, as well as some gold like we'd seen in Hong Kong. So again, a lot of technology coming from this area that impacts the global economy. Then South Korea, again, we see that integrated circuits, but also cars, definitely a value added good, taking those raw materials and creating a product that is of higher value to it. Also see a role, though, here in petroleum in South Korea as well. Then in Taiwan, again, even larger percent here of those integrated circuits, different machine parts, less on that petroleum that's down here, but again, huge impact to the technology industry. Indonesia, switching gears here, we'll come back. We'll talk more about the palm oil a little bit later, but one of the largest producers and exporters of palm oil, but also coal briquettes as well. So some more natural resources in this region. Then the Philippines, we're back to those integrated circuits as well as office machine parts here some resources such as gold or even copper, but again, mainly those integrated circuits and that technology. Then in Cambodia, we switched gears, getting away from the technology, more into the natural resources. So knit sweaters, value-added good. We need the cotton, and then that is then turned into a product. So again, value-added good here, but lots of clothing coming from this region. Again, mentioned we would come back to the palm oil. So again, Indonesia, one of the largest producers. Palm oil is found in lots of different things, ranging from shampoo and nail polish to different foods like ice cream and cookies. But palm oil is having a significant impact on our climate because, again, of kind of the clearing. So you can see all of these palm forests, kind of palm plantations, very little natural resources or natural habitat here. So then the history of this region, again, a video here kind of summarizing it, but lots of trade links with South Asia brought Hinduism and Buddhism to the region as those individuals started interacting. Port cities became religious centers. So for example, this Angkor Wat temple complex. So as the regions were coming in and these port towns, as people were importing and exporting and trading in goods, led to the exchange of religion and centers of worship. So Islam then started to spread. So there's actually more Muslims in Indonesia than any other country. So of course we think about it with the Middle East, but actually Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world. Now, colonization, of course, Europe had a role in this region as well. So it started in about the 16th century. The Spanish and Spain actually settled the Philippines. So we see kind of our little colors over here of the different European countries and where they ended up colonizing. The Netherlands were part in Indonesia. The French in the mainland of Southeast Asia, so more the Vietnam area. The British in Myanmar, so coming over more from India, a little bit closer to them. Only Thailand actually remained independent. So of all of those little regions, Thailand is the one that remained uncolonized and unaffected by European colonialism. Now, actually, Japan had a huge, kind of a bigger part in the colonization here. So Japan actually colonized the majority of Southeast Asia prior to World War II. So they learned education and resource acquisition from and realized that Europe was kind of taking over the world. So Japan's like, well, I can do that too. So they put resources into expanding their transportation and sea, and they started moving here from Japan and started colonizing more of this region. However, after the loss of World War II, their economy, of course, tanked. They didn't have the money to kind of support these different regions, so a lot of those countries gained their independence following World War II. So now looking at some of these political conflicts. So mentioned before Vietnam. So after Korea and the Cold War, which was with Russia, the U.S. feared the spread of communism and kind of this domino effect. So China was already a communist, Korea still, North Korea very communist, South Korea remained separate. But then the fear was that then Vietnam, was seeing its communism and that would then go into all these other nations. And before long, huge numbers of communist countries would be present that could hugely impact the political system, the economic system. So that's why the U.S. and other countries supported South Vietnam's resistance to communism, trying to prevent that spread. Unfortunately, though, led to a lot of loss of life and not being successful. So communism did spread into South Vietnam. So with Vietnam, and the reason that unlike the Korean War, which was successful and we and other countries were able to help South Korea remain non-communist. That effect was not seen in Vietnam, and the reason was actually due to geography. So Vietnam is a tropical rainforest, so the terrain that you can see here to the right. So the tanks and the artillery that were used in World War II and the Korean War did not work in Vietnam. The Viet Cong, though, which were the Vietnamese communists, they used a lot of guerrilla warfare, so they were able, of course, they were native to this region, so they were able to move and negate the terrain. They used smaller military units instead of large units, and just kind of ate away at the South Vietnamese and the U.S. and other countries' support. So the U.S. responded, though, with chemical warfare, using defoliants and herbicides, trying to decrease the jungle so that the tanks and their artillery could move through. Unfortunately, that has led to a lot of environmental and human impacts. So Agent Orange is one that was used. However, more research about that has shown long-term health problems, including cancer, not only in this region, but of course, those in the military who were using it or exposed to it. So the support waned, though, for this conflict, so the U.S. ended up withdrawing, and again, communism ended up coming into South Korea. Now, moving into Cambodia, again, a little video here about it. But the Khmer Rouge, the communist organization in this area, they have completely opposed all westernization, and especially the U.S. They wanted to return to agrarian society, which is growing crops. So they eliminated schools, hospitals, anything that remotely looked like westernization. So they wanted to go back to kind of this basic grassroots effort to where they grew their own produce, they were self-sufficient, and kind of supported themselves. So in that, they ended up killing intellects. So again, they didn't want anyone opposing them or teaching other things. They wanted complete domination. So they set up prison camps for anyone who threatened communism. So actually, more than about 1 million people have been killed in Cambodia during this kind of quest to go back and to this agrarian system and away from anything westernized. So this is transformed, though, led to famine and starvation. There was no way their land could support the large number of people that they have. So not only just in warfare or in all of this, but also just the natural killing due to not having the resources they needed. This Rouge, though, was defeated by the Vietnamese forces that was ultimately able to destroy this efforts. Human rights, though, were still restricted. So again, Cambodia is still not very developed. It still has a lot of room to grow. A lot of conflict in this area still today. Now, ASEAN, again, video here that talks more about it, but this is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, so just like the UN and Europe. So the idea is coming together so they would have free trade across Asia and the Pacific. The idea here is to promote that political security. Because a lot of these islands are smaller, these countries are small, coming together makes more sense. So they can grow, sharing, resources, developing better socially. So China, Japan, and the Asian tigers are emerging as these global economic leaders. So the idea of coming together, unifying so that they can have and be more successful.